Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, reading from Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 20, Text 13. Raja Pradhanan Mahataha Trilingo Daivachodhitat Jata Sassarja Bhutadir Vyad Adini Panchashaha Raja Pradhanan Mahatas Trilingo Daivachodhitat Jata Sassarja Bhutadir Vyad Adini Panchashaha Raja Pradhanan Mahatas Trilingo Daivachodhitat Jata Sassarja Bhutadir Vyad Adini Panchashaha Raja Pradhanan Mahatas Trilingo Daivachodhitat Jata Sassarja Bhutadir Vyadadini Panchashaha Raja Pradhanan Mahatas Trilingo Daivachodhitat Jata Sassarja Bhutadir Vyadadini Panchashaha Raja Pradhanan Mahatas Trilingo Daivachodhitat Jata Sassarja Bhutadir Vyadadini Panchashaha Raja Pradhanan Mahatas Trilingo Daivachodhitat Jata Sassarja Bhutadir Vyadadini Panchashaha Rajaha Pradhanat, in which the element of rajas or passion predominates. Mahataha, from the Mahatattva. Trilingaha, of three kinds. Daivachodhitat, impelled by superior authority. Jataha, was born. Sassarja, evolved. Bhuta Adihi, the false ego, origin of the material elements. Vyat, the ether. Adini, rather Adini, beginning with. Panchashaha, in groups of 5. Translation. As impelled by the destiny of the jiva, the false ego, which is of 3 kinds, evolved from the Mahatattva, in which the element of rajas predominates. From the ego, in turn, evolved many groups of 5 principles. The primordial matter, or prakriti, material nature, consisting of 3 modes, generates 4 groups of 5. The first group is called elementary and consists of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. The second group of 5 is called tanmatra, referring to the subtle elements, sense objects: sound, touch, form, taste, and smell. The third group is the 5 sense organs for acquiring knowledge: eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin. The fourth group is the 5 working senses: speech, hands, feet, anus, and genitals. Some say that there are 5 groups of 5. One group is the sense objects, one is the 5 elements, one is the 5 sense organs for acquiring knowledge, another is the senses for working, and the 5th group is the 5 deities who control these divisions. That was the purport, and once again the translation. As impelled by the destiny of the jiva, the false ego, which is of 3 kinds, evolved from the mahatattva, in which the element of rajas predominates. From the ego, in turn, evolved many groups of 5 principles. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Svapadantikam. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye. Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratushe Namaha. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavnebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So we are continuing today. Srimad Bhagavatam is, of course, a series of questions and answers, right? And so we are continuing on this questioning between Maitreya and Vidura, right? And so Maitreya, he has inquired as to how this world manifests, right? How it is generated and how it is developed. I was saying last week, we know there's the multiple factors of what defines a Purana, right? For something to be Puranic, right? We have Sarga and we have Visarga, right? So we'll come to have an understanding of both through this canto, right? How these creations are developed. And we hear something rather interesting here, right? We hear, of course, Mahatattva is the, it's like raw material. It's that root element, if you will. And the first thing which we hear developing from it is the false ego, right? This is very interesting. I've always found this interesting because we're so quick to want to dissolve the false ego. We're so quick to wish to conquer it, right? That's very happily our, if we will, our one of our primary goals in Krishna consciousness, right? And so sometimes there can be a frustration. I know I have the frustration, right? Sometimes I'll think, I'm feeling very happy in my Krishna consciousness, and then somebody will say something nice to me, and I think, wow, they finally noticed, right? They finally noticed how amazing I am, right? And then when I feel that feeling coming up, I think, oh, there we go, false ego is still there in so much, right? In such large quantities, it's still there, right? And it's always there, it's a sneaky little guy, right? But I almost get comforted by texts like this, right? Because the false ego is that first thing that formed, right? It's very, very old, right? It's been there for a long time. We know Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he says the jiva, since time immemorial, right? Anadi. Shri Shri Radha Gopinath Ki Jai. Since time immemorial, right? We've been growing or at least I've been growing and developing this false ego, right? So it's very thick, it's very strong, And therefore, it's very, very hard to do away with. And that's why it does have so much emphasis, right? We do not emphasize the chastisement of the false ego because it is easy. We emphasize it because it is that really great enemy that's there, right? All other things really are relatively easy to conquer compared to the false ego, right? Eating meat, right? All of the other sort of regulated principles, right? Doing drugs, all of those things are not so difficult actually to overcome, right? But the false ego is very, very difficult. And it must be overcome, right? Because it is that first sort of step of material existence. We can say it's a primordial one, right? And very few people escape away from it. Even those in the mode of goodness are still fully captured by the false ego. It's simply a kosher way of engaging with the false ego, if you will, right? So all of these issues are there. And therefore, the false ego is a very, very nasty enemy. And of course, we have this emphasized a lot. We know the third shloka of the Shikshashtakam, right? Trinadapi sunichana tarorapi sahishnana, right? Amanina amanadena kirtaniya sadaharihi, right? We hear this is the qualification for chanting the holy name, right? We hear there's no rules and regulations, but this in one sense is the rule and regulation, right? Not that we have to get up at 3 a.m. and stand on one arm and breathe through one nostril and all of these sort of things. These are not the rules and regulations and qualifications of chanting Hare Krishna, right? But what is the qualification to chant the name purely, to chant it wonderfully? It is to be so very humble. And therefore there's a saying in Bengal, right? There's a Bengali saying. And what they say is oh, I heard the Gauriya Vaishnavas, I heard them preach, I heard them speak about Krishna Prem. And I thought, wow, this is something very fantastic, right? I heard them speak about the wonderful qualities of Gauranga Mahaprabhu, dancing and singing that wonderful kirtan. I heard all of these wonderful things about the pastimes of Radha and Krishna. And I thought, oh, if there is anything I want to be, it is a Gauriya Vaishnav. And hearing this, I went there for a while, right? And then one day, somebody told me this third verse of the Shikshashtakam, Trinadapi sunichana. And I thought, oh, it's impossible, and I gave up. That is the saying they have, right? Because it is very, very difficult. It's very hard for us to conceptualize, even in an existential level, right? To the very level of who we think we are, right? It's not only that we are attached to sense gratification, but we're very much attached to the notions of who we think we are in general, right? Albert Camus, he's a rascal for one, but he's a French philosopher for another, right? And he wrote this one essay called On Traveling. And it was an interesting essay, actually. I thought it was a really, really nice insight into how the false ego works, right? And he was, in a surprising moment, relatively self-aware about it. And he was talking about how when he travels, right, he goes overseas, and you go to all these wonderful countries when you travel, and you see all these sights, and you still experience all the threefold sufferings and all, right? And he's talking about how, all of these wonderful things, you're traveling around, and he gets to travel around. He was a famous playwright as well, so he had that opportunity. But he would say there's something very interesting he notices. Wherever he goes, in the hotels, because of course he speaks French, right? He's a Frenchman. In all of the hotels, he would always see newspapers written in French, no matter which country he would be in. And I'm not sure if any of you have noticed this, but when you go to hotels overseas, they will have the newspapers in all the different languages, right? And you would think, why is this here? Why am I flying over all the way to, I don't know where he was traveling, India or Germany or America or wherever. Why am I flying all the way over here in order to read a newspaper in French about France, which I can do anytime? And he was reflecting on this. He thought this was very peculiar, very weird. Why are these here? And so he was saying, after reflecting after a while, he came to the conclusion that when you're traveling, you are taken away from everything that your ego normally identifies with, right? Purijan Prabhu sometimes says, ahankar means I am my car, right? Aham means I and car, right? I am my car, right? You see your car, you see your house, you see your relatives, you see your friends, you see your family, you see all of these things, and you think I am them, right? And so when you're traveling, you're taken away from all of these things. Your car is gone, right? Your wardrobe is gone. If you're really looking for escape, not too many relatives are there with you, right? All of these things are gone. All of these signs of who I am are gone. And what does the person do in such a context? They panic, right? They feel overwhelmed by this feeling of who am I? Who could I be, right? If my house is not here, if my car is not here, if even my language is not here, right? We know people are very, very attached, especially to their language, right? I remember, I forgot who, but one of you told me once on book distribution that if you meet somebody who's not an English speaker, if you glorify their language, they're 5 times more likely to take a book. That's apparently the case, right? And especially if you show them one of Prabhupada's books in their language, even no matter what religious view they have, no matter how favorable they were before, instantly they'll think, oh wow, these books must be very good if they've been made in my language, right? So like this, we see people are very attached to their language, right? So when they're traveling, they're away from all of these things. So why then the newspaper, right? The newspaper is there to remind you, oh, that's what I am. Camus, he said that. I see the French newspaper and I think, oh yes, I'm a Frenchman, this is my identity. Now I have the French newspaper. Now I can relax. Now I don't need to worry about any of this self-realization stuff. I know, I'm a Frenchman, right? Jiber Shurupoi, right? I'm a Frenchman. So, like this, he reflected. So this is the nature of attachment with the false ego. It's not just questions of pride. It's not just questions of sense gratification. It comes to fundamental questions which can be very scary. We know this is actually, I think, in many ways a refutation of impersonalism, right? Because impersonalists, they'll want to make a big go, right? To dissolve who you are, forget who you are, all of this. But it's actually a very scary idea. No one wants to do that, right? Nobody wants to dissolve away into some sort of mush, right? No one wants to do that. Because it's not the foundational nature of the soul, right? But yet still, we've done the mistake of identifying with that which we are not. Again, as it is said here, this is why it needs to be the first step of this material world. All of the engagements in this material world happen because of the false ego. There's a reason why it's the first element formed, right? You start with the foundation of everything. Everything else that has ever developed in material history has just been a development of I am the controller, I am the enjoyer, I am not Nitya Krishna Das, right? So all of these things are like this, and that's why it comes to the core of this anxiety, right? Who am I, right? And that's what we know about this Krishna conscious philosophy. It is not that we are saying, lose your ego, lose your sense of yourself. Actually, sometimes people will feel this way, right? Especially when you're just first reading Prabhupada's books and maybe not fully grasping the philosophy in a holistic sense. They'll think, we're here to conquer the false ego. I still remember once Kadambakanana Maharaj, he was giving a class in New Govardhan, and he was speaking about smashing the false ego, right? All these sort of, these very powerful topics that we repeat often, right? And one Mataji at the end, she said, Maharaj, you were speaking about the spiritual world, right? And you're saying how we should be attached to Krishna, but attachment is a bad thing. What do we do? And so Maharaj, he sort of took a second back because he was thinking, what are you talking about? We're chanting, we're getting up in the morning, what do you think we're doing besides getting attached to Krishna, right? So Maharaj, he took a step back and then he sort of processed it and he said, yeah, attachment to the material world is bad, but attachment to Krishna, well, hopefully one day we can have it, right? So, it is not the case that we are trying to dissolve the ego, right? This is one of the fantastic flourishes of Srila Prabhupada's translation, right? Ahankara is false ego. Krishna consciousness is not about becoming less of a person. It's not about having less of an ego. Ego literally is the Greek word for I, right? I, the I-ing potential. Same with ahankar, right? Aham, tama aham bhajami, onto that personality. I am giving my worship, right? All of these things about I, right? But there's actually nothing wrong about going into one's individual existence, right? If anything, Krishna consciousness is pushing it even further, right? Krishna consciousness is saying you must become more of an individual, you must become more of a person, right? Krishna consciousness is not about dissolving one's personality, about dissolving one's individual nature. It's about truly becoming an individual, right? Because right now, what is that apparent individual nature that we think we have, right? Prakrite kriyamanani, right? Gunai karmani sarvashaha, right? So we're seeing all of these elements moving around, and we're thinking, this is me, right? And this is what all of society is, right? People are so proud, right? So proud of their nation, so proud of the flag, so proud of what they do, right? All of these things are simply movements of the material nature, right? All of these things simply moving around. And so then they're here today, gone tomorrow, right? It's completely different. You'll see this, what a person is proud about will change especially you see it in teenagers the most, right? Every few years, maybe even 3 months, right? They're proud of a new thing, there's a new thing, this is who I am, right? It's not a phase, I am head-shaved punk, right? And then a few weeks later, it's not a phase, I am a communist. And then a few weeks later, it's not a phase, I am a libertarian, right? And then a few weeks later, it's not a phase, I'm this or that, whatever, right? And really, all of material existence is just that, but on a broader spectrum, right? All the teenage phases are just lifetimes, right? It's not a phase, I am a male in the body of an Australian, right? In the year 2000. It's not a phase, I am an ant, a female ant, right? Somewhere in sub-Saharan Africa, right? All of these things, they're just like the teenage, it's not a phase, this is who I am, right? But it never is who they are, right? It's constantly passing through all of these births. And so, that's why we hear, ahankara vimudhatma, right? Kartaham iti manyate, right? The vimudha, right? Not just the regular mudha, not just the regular fool, right? But the vimudha, he thinks. As I still remember when I was in Mayapur. Once I was showing my grandmother where the, Ishodyan Bhavan, the very nice hotel, right? So we got that one because my grandmother's a little old. We didn't want to put her through the austerity of staying in my little concrete box, right? So as I was walking in, you see lots of families, they like to book Ishodyan Bhavan for the comfort of it, right? I still remember I saw this family and there were these 2 children, they were running in and they were fighting. And there's one child turned around to the other one and just yelled louder than I've ever heard, Mudha! And the other child just instantly turned around crying and ran away. And I was thinking, wow, Vedic culture. Look how these nice Sanskritized insults. This is Varnashram. Anyways, so vimudha, right? So foolish, right? And therefore, we see, again, this emphasis, right? The emphasis on what? The emphasis on conquering the false ego. And again, we see that Trinadapi Sunichana, this text. I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with the Prabhupada disciple, Kurmarupa Prabhu. Yeah, he did a lot of the Go Seva. He also wrote this amazing article in Vaishnava Aparad. In whatever my humble opinion is, I think it's one of the best presentations of the philosophy. He goes through every single text and makes this very systematic presentation of the levels of Vaishnava Aparad, the effects of different Vaishnava Aparads. So yeah, if you have spare time, which especially this time of year you don't, but at any point you can look into it. It's a really, really wonderful article. But anyways, he actually had this text tattooed around his neck. He had Trinadapi Sunichana tattooed, because what does Krishnadas Kaviraj Thakur write, right? Chaitanya Charitamrita, all devotees should wear this like a garland around the neck, right? Should take this verse and wear it like a garland. So he quite literally, he had it tattooed around like this as a constant reminder how to chant the holy name, right? And so we find this very much embodied, right? In Gaur Lila especially. And no one embodies this more, at least in the way that I've heard it, than Haridas Thakur, right? Haridas Thakur so strongly embodies this, and that's why, again, he is Namacharya. That is his qualification, right? His qualification to be the Namacharya is his strong humility. You can think about it, right? When we think about how he was not allowed into the Jagannath Puri in the Mandir, right? In the Jagannath Mandir, right? He wasn't allowed in, right? We can think of the absurdity of that. Who is Haridas Thakur? What is his identity? Who is he an incarnation of? Brahma, right? And who helped build that temple in the first place? Right? Brahma, right? So here we have Brahma, right? And what did Haridas Thakur come in? Did he say, all of you rascals, I built this place. You forget about letting me in. This place wouldn't exist if it wasn't for me, right? Did Haridas Thakur say that? No, Haridas Thakur, he simply accepted it, right? This is the humility of Haridas Thakur, right? If anyone had a right to enter into that temple, it was Haridas Thakur, right? And yet he said no. right? He simply accepted it. We see this all the time in Chaitanya Charitamrita. What would happen? Thakur Haridas, right? He would go somewhere and they would say, oh, you're not allowed in, right? You're not allowed in. We won't allow you in here. But what do we see as a result of that? The result of that is that after Mahaprabhu and all these great devotees, what they will do is they would take the prasad that is relished there, right? And they would give it to Haridas Thakur. Haridas Thakur, not being allowed in his humility, he received something greater. He received the Maha Prasad, right? He received the prasad from the hands of the Vaishnavas. So something even greater, right? This is the result of his humility. Because of his humility, he has achieved something much greater, right? And so Haridas Thakur, in this way, he embodies this humility, right? This humility is very essential. But it's hard to cultivate this humility, right? So difficult, right? It's very hard not to, sometimes, even on a basic level, right? We hear the great acharyas, what do they describe the Supreme Personality of Godhead as, right? Patita Pavana. And whenever they describe him in that way, they always tend to emphasize, well, you're Patita Pavana and I'm Patita, right? I am the most sinful, and therefore you should save me, right? We hear this in Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu. There's another bhajan that gets attributed to Narottam Das Thakur, although it's unlikely he actually wrote it, but it still has some nice siddhanta. And in it, it says, Krishna, I cannot call you Patita Pavana unless you save me. Krishna, I cannot even worship you as Patita Pavana unless you save me. I'm sorry, because I am the most sinful. And if you do not save me, then you are not Patita Pavana. I am not saying this out of any other desire, just to be siddhantically correct. If I do not obtain Krishna Bhakti, then you are not Patita Pavana. I'm sorry. This is simply the fact, right? Like this, and they pray. And it's a difficult thing, how to cultivate this idea that we're the most fallen, right? It's easy when we're seeing, especially now, coronavirus has ended, so many devotees are visiting. It's easy when we're seeing like Devamrita Maharaj, Ramai Maharaj. It's very easy to be next to them and think, I'm the most fallen, right? But then it's very difficult. You're walking down the street and you see some people, they're not drinking. Who knows what they're drinking? They're drinking something or another, right? So they're drinking all sorts of things. It's definitely not charanamrit, right? And they're eating whatever, right? You can walk past all of the restaurants and you smell again. But they're not drinking charanamrit and they're not eating prasad, right? All of these things, right? Or we'll see, especially sometimes if I do a late submission for university, I'll walk around at night to sort of rest the modes going through my head before going to sleep. And sometimes I'll go outside and you'll see people, more unconscious than conscious, stumbling around, and they're definitely not following any of the regulative principles. Maybe once in a year they'll follow one of the regulative principles, right? So like this, right? And it's difficult, we see such personalities, and then it's very hard to think I'm the most fallen. It's very easy to see them and think, actually I'm fallen, but I'm not that fallen, right? I'm the somewhat fallen, not the most fallen, right? So Madhavananda Prabhu, he comments on this. And he says it's a difficult trap, right? It's difficult, hard to deal with. But he says the way that he resolves it, right, is he thinks, I have heard so many things about Krishna, right? I'm making a big deal about hearing Krishna Katha. I'm making a big deal about even speaking it. I'm making a big deal about reading Prabhupada's books and learning so many things. And yet really, I'm basically as addicted to sense gratification as they are, right? So in that way, I can think I'm the most fallen. That's what he says his meditation is, whenever he sees such personalities. These personalities, they've not heard about Krishna. They've not heard about the nature of this material world. And having not heard about it, of course they're going to act in this way. This is natural, right? But I'm the most fallen, right? Because the devotees are so constantly pouring their mercy onto me. The devotees are so constantly reaching out to give me their mercy. And I'm so fallen that I'm still thinking, okay, I'm feeling very nice. I'm giving class and everyone is watching me, right? I'm feeling very nice. I am the center, right? I'm feeling very nice, right? That somebody will do this or that for me, right? I'm feeling very, very built up in my ego, right? So in this way, Madhavananda Prabhu, he says, that way I can think that actually I am the most fallen because I'm being given so much and I'm still rejecting most of it, right? Maybe I chant Namaparad once in a while, right? What does that make me? That makes me the biggest fool, makes me the biggest rascal, and definitely makes me the most fallen. So in this way, Madhavananda Prabhu, he speaks about cultivating this humility, which is so very essential. Because of course there can be attachment, all sorts of things. Again, even in spiritual life, this is the big trap, right? We come to destroy our ego, and then we get caught in the little traps. Again, it's the first element formed. It's going to take a long while before it gets decayed away. I still remember my mother, she told me, in Guwahati, where she grew up in Assam. She said there was this one Goryamat there, right? And there, the brahmacharis, it was famous that like 2 of them had killed themselves because they were thinking, I might have to enter into the Grihastha ashram. And they were so attached to the prestige of their saffron cloth that they thought, I'd rather die than give up the prestige of the saffron. So rather than just, enter into the ashram, because clearly they were not made for it, right? I can't remember the exact story. Either they had been sharing with others, or even their spiritual master had told them, time to enter the Grihastha ashram, Brahmacharya ashram is not for them. And so they killed themselves, right? That's how attached they were, right? To their position, right? To where they were, because they thought, wow, I'm something very, very high, something very, very elevated, right? And now I'm being forced to downgrade, right? That is how they felt, right? And so because of that, they gave up the ghost. So, my mother was telling me that, and then she was saying at that point, of course she was saying brahmacharya is the ideal platform for executing Krishna consciousness. But the ego is so powerful that it turned the ideal platform for their execution of Krishna consciousness, right, into being such an obstacle for it, right? It took such a great and powerful thing. And again, this is the danger of the ego, right? How powerful the ego is. The ego is that real enemy. We know Srila Prabhupada, he writes this in first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Kali Yuga begins when the Brahmanas begin to feel ego in their heart, right? Because we know that's why Parikshit Maharaj, he got cursed, because there was an offense to the ego, right? And Prabhupada, he says, this is when Kali Yuga really begins, right? The nefarious demon, right, of the ego creeping in, right? And in that way, again, in that example, right, we know what taking some of the most important, right, and some of the most powerful aspects of Krishna consciousness and using it against them, right? So this is the difficulty, right? This is the difficulty of the false ego, right? So like this, we have to keep on going. Of course, that's not to say that sometimes somebody, not that impractically one should think, right? Impractically one should think, I will not point out any issues with anyone. Sometimes people think like that. I'm too humble to preach to anyone. I'm too humble to correct anyone. I'm too humble to do any of these things. But Prabhupada, he writes in Chaitanya Charitamrita, right? He writes regarding Mahaprabhu's preaching in South India, right? And Mahaprabhu, when he goes preaching throughout South India, right? Who does he meet? He meets the Brahmin, the Kurma Vipra, and he meets, I'm mind blanking with the, he pulls the maggots. What's his name? Vasudev, yes. So he meets both of them, right? And what's interesting is you'll find he gives them very similar advice. What is that advice? Preach Krishna consciousness, right? Basically, he gives the same advice to both of them, right? To both of these personalities he meets. And Prabhupada, he writes in his purports in that section, he says it is the false humility of one who says, oh, I am too humble to become a guru, right? He says this is false humility. This is nonsense. Those who say, I'm too humble to be a guru, I'm too low to be a guru. No, it is the order of Mahaprabhu that one must go out and preach, right? But this seems very different. This feels very contradictory, right? Because we think how much opulence the position of the guru has, right? And we think, oh, it is a very humble thing not to want to become a guru, right? This is a tension point. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he comments on this. He says, Gauriya Vaishnavas, we have a real predicament in our philosophy, right? We have a real predicament. What is our predicament? Our predicament is that in order for our parampara to continue, like any parampara, we need gurus, right? We need spiritual masters. But the problem is, the moment one becomes a guru, they're no longer a Vaishnav. So what do we do? This is our issue, right? Saraswati Thakur says, right? This is the problem that we have as Gauriya Vaishnavas, right? We need Vaishnav gurus, but the moment one becomes a guru, they're no longer a Vaishnav. Now what do we do, right? So of course, we know naturally the solution is that nobody actually becomes a guru, right? When one is acting as a guru, they're simply acting as a perfect disciple because their spiritual master has asked them to preach, because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has asked them to preach. At no point is the idea, right? And of course, I think this is not applying to us, but it applies to all of us. To some degree, we are preaching. To some degree, we are training people in Krishna consciousness, all of us, right? We are all, no matter who we are, having some opportunity where we can proclaim the message of Mahaprabhu. So it's not that we should think that such instructions are only there for the real, the highest level gurus. To some degrees, we are all playing the role of guru, right? Jiva Goswami, he says there's 3 types of gurus. He splits the Shiksha Guru into 2 parts. He says there's the Shiksha Guru, who teaches one about bhajan, how to perform Krishna consciousness, how to perform devotional service. And then there's the Shravana Shiksha Guru, right? Who teaches one the philosophy, right? Because we'll see that some people, they'll teach philosophy and then they'll disappear. And the other one, he's saying, this is how you put dhoti on. This is how you wear tilak, right? This is Vaishnava etiquette, right? So you see these 2 things. If one is doing either one of those things, to some degree, you're acting as guru, right? So this is why this instruction is there. And this is what Srila Prabhupada is intending when he's saying this, right? It is a false humility to put oneself away and think, I will not do this. Why is it a false humility? Because the greatest humility is that my existence is the order of the spiritual master. What the spiritual master requests, this is my existence. I was reading the passing away, the disappearance of one disciple of Srila Radhanath Maharaj, a brahmachari disciple, I think. And he was leaving his body, right? And as he was passing away, right? Radhanath Maharaj, he was saying, which form would you like in the spiritual world? He was saying, right? He's saying, you are passing away. Which form do you desire, right? Where would you like to go? You can take all of. He was explaining, right? Trying to keep him Krishna conscious as he's leaving his body, and he was saying, there's so many different forms, right? He was saying like this, something along those lines. And this disciple, he said, Guru Maharaj, wherever you want me to be in the spiritual world, that's where I want to go. That's what he said, right? This is the nature, right? We speak about what is the true identity of the self. The true identity of the self is to be embodying the wish and desire of the spiritual master, right? Like this. This is the true nature of the self. And so, Shri Shri Radha Gopinath Ki Jai. And so in this way, we find, why was I making the point? Oh yes, so that is why we take up, right? Having to guide, right? Having to be a guru of some sort, right? Actually, the guru, the perfect guru is not a guru, right? The true guru is not a guru. The true guru is a perfect disciple, right? And that is why they are so qualified to then act as guru, right? Internally. And that's why we see Srila Prabhupada, right? You see Vyas Pujas where Srila Prabhupada was present. And what did Srila Prabhupada say? I'm simply offering all of this worship to Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, right? That is all that I'm doing. That is the only reason. I'm accepting this worship simply to offer it back to my spiritual master. I know my own spiritual master. He would, one of my godbrothers was telling me that for a long while he would request to be doing katha preaching over during his appearance day, right? So that he would always be traveling. He would always be en route during his appearance day, right? So that way he could avoid hearing any of the glorifications, right? That way it'd be too impractical. No one would be able to throw any Vyas Puja celebrations because Guru Maharaj would be on a train or something. Like this, he would run away from it, right? And so we see this. I know I was reading Devaki Mataji's book on the false ego. And she was saying she knows one other sannyasi, right? Senior sannyasi in ISKCON who's a guru, right? And he would be cowering in his room on the Vyas Puja day thinking, I don't want to hear all of these glorifications, right? Why are they all glorifying me? But simply, of course, as a service, you'll see. On the other hand, I see Indradrumna Maharaj, who embodies the exact same quality. But on the other hand, he listens to all of the offerings, right? And you might think, right, oh, that's not too bad, listening to all those offerings, until you realize how many disciples Maharaj has. I remember seeing on his Vyas Puja all of these offerings going on and on and on, No matter how much you like to hear all, and I could see it was because of his mood of service, right? This is his service to encourage all of his disciples, right? He is happily doing this, right? So like this we see. But then ultimately we'll see Devaki Mataji, she points out something really wonderful. She says actually the spiritual master will often be present in the Vyas Puja so that after all of that they can speak some glorification of their own spiritual master. and thinking that they have the opportunity to speak those words, they very happily will turn up, right? Or rather, maybe a mixed bag of feelings, right? So this is the nature, right, of ego, of guruship. All of these different questions and problems, they come up, right? And so we find this is the nature of Krishna consciousness, right? That we are trying to overcome this false ego. And why? Why should we overcome this false ego, right? Sometimes we'll think, right, what is the point of overcoming this false ego? What is the danger, right, of this false ego? And sometimes we think, oh, the danger of this false ego is that I will have some sense gratification. Oh, I will stay in this material world. Actually, that's one of the lesser dangers of the false ego. The greatest danger of the false ego is what are we trying to become, right? As I said right at the beginning, Krishna consciousness is about becoming more of a person than we are now, not less of a person, right? And of course, as part of becoming more of a person, we need to understand the person we are not, right? Indra Prabhu, he would often say this is his frustration, right? He would chant his rounds almost angrily and frustrated. And he would say, I'm not this body, I'm not this body. But then who am I? This is the question of Krishna consciousness, right? But we must first realize we are not this body before we can understand who we are, right? Krishna consciousness begins with Srila Prabhupada saying, you are not this body, right? But its conclusion, its fullness, is when Srila Prabhupada says, you are the eternal servitor of Krishna, right? And to understand that identity deeper and deeper is the whole purpose of Krishna consciousness. So then what is the danger of the false ego? The danger of the false ego is that when we think we are going deeper into understanding our identity is what? Our identity as a devotee of Krishna, our identity, a specific identity, right? Because of course we have some sort of specific form in the spiritual world relating with Krishna, right? But when we try to understand that, we will project the false ego into it. And then we will become maha-aparadhi. We will become the greatest offender, right? Good luck to anyone who projects their enjoying propensity into Krishna Leela, right? This is the sahajiya platform. This is the sahajiya tendency, right? The prakrita sahajiyas, what would they do? They would do all these mundane things and they would say, Jai, Krishna prema, right? Not Krishna prema. Krishna aparad. That is all that is being committed, right? So why then? Because when we hear, oh, this is this identity, this is this identity, and until and unless we have our false ego purified enough, we will project our false ego, and we will do what we have been doing, again, anadi, since time immemorial, right? So long we've existed in this material world. So long since we first had that desire to enjoy, right? So long we've wandered around, right? And so we've built that up, and so we're used to seeing things and saying, oh, this is for me to enjoy. And what happens then? Can we enter into Krishna Leela? That's what some of the Babajis, what they'll do in Radhakund, right? They'll initiate you and they'll say, you are so-and-so Manjari, you are however many years old, you are doing this, you're doing that, these are your friends. That's what they will say. And actually this system is bona fide. Bhaktivinoda Thakur said that this system is bona fide. But Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Prabhupada, he completely rejected this system, not because it wasn't bona fide. Again, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he says this is a very valid system. It's come to us, I think, from Gopal Guru Goswami. This is a valid system, but it's invalid because who was qualified to reveal these things? Forget about who was qualified to hear these things, right? Who was qualified actually to reveal these things? And actually I've heard this. One person I knew, he would mix a little bit with the devotees in that sort of area, right? And he told me one person he knew, and eventually then he came into shelter of an acharya in the line of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. But he said he went and he got initiated by one of these Babajis, right? And they told him, you are so-and-so, right? This is your identity. And then he was very, meditating, this is my form, write this, right? For a while. And then after a while, he became a little disillusioned with Krishna consciousness, went away, whatever, right? But then after a while, he felt inspired again in Krishna consciousness, this time by a different Babaji, right? So he felt inspired again and he thought, okay, now I will go, right? Now I will go and I will take shelter and I will really commit to it. So he thought, okay, I will get initiated, I will get initiated again. And of course, I'll get initiated again and he'll tell me the same form. He went along, to his surprise, he was a different Manjari this time, right? So is this a very elevated personality who has two forms in the spiritual world? Or is it maybe that these things are very, very high and very, very elevated? Who knows? Could be either case. If I was a gambling man, which of course I am not, I would put my money on the ladder, right? That these are very, very high things. Jiva Goswami himself, he never describes this system, this where you get given it an initiation. Jiva Goswami says either the spiritual master will reveal it, in a dream or directly to disciples that are advanced enough, or the holy name will directly reveal it. But any other way, we do not follow in our line, right? And why is that? Again, if you hear this in this form, you'll think, oh, it's just like all of the many other material bodies I've had before, right? I've been a girl before, I've been a boy before, I've been an ant, I've been this, I've been that, I've been American, I've been Indian, I've been whatever, right? I've been all of these different things before, right? Oh, so here we go, here's just another body. I'll push my ahankar into it, my false ego into it, right? Huh. And then, of course, then we have that issue, right? This is the issue. And then we fall into offense, not just primarily offense of Krishna, but also then we can technically fall into offense for the devotees, right? Sometimes you'll see this, right? Madhavananda Prabhu, he talks about Bhakta Bab, right? The theoretical Bhakta Bab, right? Bhakta Bab has never read the Nectar of Instruction, but he's memorized the entire Radhika Sahasranam, right? He knows the 1008 names of Srimati Radharani, but he doesn't know the Upadeshamrita, right? And so what will Bhakta Bab think? Bhakta Bab, he is living in Radhakund, he is reciting every day 1000 names of Srimati Radharani, right? He is reciting all of these things. What will he think? He will see then a devotee who is simply trying to learn Vacho Vegam, Manasakrodha Vegam, Jihva Vegam, Udara Pasta Vegam, right? He is simply trying to restrain, and he will think, oh, here is a Kanishta, right? Here is a very low-level devotee. He does not understand the glories of Srimati Radharani like I do. He is not a very elevated personality like I am, right? I know my form in the spiritual world. I'm not yet initiated, but I know my form in the spiritual world, right? They can be. Of course, this is an exaggerated example Madhavananda Prabhu gives, but we can see that tendency, right? I am so elevated now. And then offenses will naturally flow, right? If one thinks oneself to be elevated on that platform when they're not, then they will see others, right? And they will see these others and they will think, oh, well, naturally they're not elevated like me. Not elevated. When I chant, I just think of the Ras, whatever. We all know the standard Sahajiya lines, right? So that's why it can result. And of course we know Vaishnava Aparad, very, very serious. I won't touch on it because we're reaching towards the end. But what to say? So severe. One sadhu once, his disciple, was very critical, right? Very critical, was constantly criticizing the other, his god brothers, right? He was constantly criticizing, like that. And of course, being a modern day devotee, right? His background was in meat eating, right? Which is again what? 70% of devotees today, right? If we include onion and garlic, it's 99.9%, right? So what he told him though, his spiritual master, he heard this. He heard that he was always criticizing all of these other devotees. And he said, today, my instruction to you is you start eating meat. And then he said, Guru Maharaj, what are you saying? I'm such a great devotee, how could I eat meat? He said, I want you to eat meat because I would rather you eat the meat of animals than you eat the meat of the Vaishnavas. Better that you eat animals than you constantly bite. By your constant criticism of the other devotees, you are doing something worse than eating meat. You are eating the Vaishnavas. And this is such a great offense. He said like this, a little bit of a heavy instruction. But he said, your constant criticism all the time, you may as well be a meat eater. Better that you'd be a meat eater. I would rather you would leave my association and go back to eating meat. It would be better for your spiritual life. Right? Anyway, so Vaishnava Aparad, very heavy. Very heavy. We should always be avoiding it. And that's why Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, he said, related to that comment about being the guru. One of his disciples was again very critical, right? Always criticizing, saying, oh, this, and it got back to him. Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, he wrote a long letter to him and he said, why are you so eager to take up this painful service, right, of finding faults? We know it's a famous letter, right? Why are you so eager for this? Why are you so eager? It is not something that is pleasant to have to do this, right? It's a classic thing. If you're enjoying this, then you're not doing, then you shouldn't be doing it, right? I know I was speaking to one devotee and he was telling me, he said, Prabhu, sometimes people, they say, whatever service I'm singing in kirtan or something, and they'll say that was really nice kirtan. I feel so uncomfortable when I hear it. And I say, Prabhu, when you start feeling comfortable hearing it, then you start talking to me about it. Then it's a problem we can discuss. That's not a problem. Everything's going fine, right? The moment you're feeling comfortable, then maybe we can start thinking red alert. So like this, right? discomfort. So, again, this is the nature of Krishna consciousness. When we go deeper and deeper into that identity. And once we reach deeper into that identity becomes very valuable. We are not this body. We are not this body, right? This is what we hear so regularly. Do we realize it? I know I don't, right? I think I've realized it. Every day I think, something will happen. I think, wow, I'm not this body. And then what happens? One day, there's no hot water in the morning. I take a cold shower, and then I realize, no, maybe I am this body. That's the sort of thought I have, right? So again, very easy for us to say, and we'll think ABCs, ABCs. But until we realize we're not this body, as Indra Prabhu was saying, then we won't realize what body we actually are, right? So again, it's not enough to simply hear, I am not this body. We must realize I'm not this body, right? So anyways, we hear all of these things, and I'll conclude on this note. We hear all of these things, but we see that when one's true identity is realized, then everything becomes valuable. Then no longer it's prakrite kriyamanani. Then no longer it's the vimudha, right, who is thinking these things, right? Then it's no longer the case, right? This is what we see in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes. We know Haridas Thakur, right? At one point, his chanting was slowing down a bit, apparently, right? And so everyone became worried. And I always love this detail because I think, imagine being so absorbed in the holy names that not that you're not chanting, but you're not chanting as quickly, as fashionably as before. And people think, oh, something must be wrong. If I am chanting, people will think, oh, Prabhu, you're inspired today. If I'm chanting at all, people will think, oh, something's a little different today. Do you have exams? Are you procrastinating? That's what people will say, right? But here, he's having the complete opposite experience, right? Just simply by slowing down in his chanting, everyone became worried, right? And we know so famously, Haridas Thakur, he was very dejected. He was thinking, I do not want to see the conclusion of Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes. And so we can also think, Haridas Thakur, what does he request? He says, my only desire is that I can end my pastimes before your pastimes end. And we can think, how many times could Haridas Thakur have very validly asked for a favor from Mahaprabhu when he was being beaten to the verge of death on the streets, right? When he was being rejected from everywhere. He could have asked Mahaprabhu, oh Mahaprabhu, please, let me enter in the temple once. Let me enter into the Brahmana's house. Please, let me not be beaten and assaulted everywhere I go because I'm chanting the holy names so passionately. Haridas Thakur never said any of that. He simply accepted all of it. Again, attachment, right? We were saying attachment is bad, but attachment to the Supreme Personality of Godhead is good. Forget about good. It's something we can really hunger for, right? It's not, you're allowed to be attached to Krishna, right? It's not like that at all, right? We must hunger for it, right? And again, we see this in Haridas Thakur. All of these times he could have asked for it, but he was detached from that. But what was he attached to? Attached to the lotus golden feet of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Again, there he is embodying it, right? So there we have Haridas Thakur, and he requests this. And as we know, then he concludes his earthly pastimes. And I always find this is one of the most powerful images of Krishna consciousness. We all know what happens next, right? Mahaprabhu, he takes the body of Haridas Thakur and he dances with it. And I often think, Haridas Thakur, right? Muslim, right? And because he was a Muslim, the Hindus, they did not like him very much. They rejected him. They felt that he was dirty. Because he was chanting the holy names, a lot of the Muslims also did not like him very much and they rejected him, kafir, whatever, right? And so we see, here is Haridas Thakur, so mistreated, right? His body was seen as so dirty by the materialists, right? By those who are in the mundane conception, those who are on the ahankar, false ego conception. They saw his body and they saw something that was dirty, untouchable. They didn't want to associate with it, right? And now, in the pastime, what appears to be a dead body, right? And we know dead bodies, they're not very clean in Vedic conception, right? I know when I went for my grandfather's funeral, we had to really purify ourselves after the whole thing was done, right? So now, even if it was the body of what would have been considered by material calculation some great brahmana, right? This body would not be considered so clean, right? This is something now to be disposed away with. Forget then of a body that was seen by materialists as so dirty, as so unworthy. But what does Mahaprabhu do with that body? Does he discard it? Does he throw it away? No, he embraces it and he dances with it and he cries. This is what happens in the fullness of one's identity. one establishes that relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And suddenly then, we go into the depths of identity. There he is in the depths of identity, and suddenly all of that becomes valuable. Identification becomes valuable. Ego becomes valuable. The ego of Haridas Thakur is infinitely valuable and infinitely worshipable, and something we should all aspire towards. Because what was that ego? That ego was, I wish only. Who am I? I'm somebody who wishes only to have darshan of Sri Gauranga Mahaprabhu. That is an ego of value, right? So there we find, this is the fullness of ego, right? And this is the fullness of Krishna consciousness. Material calculations, that those things which the false ego rejects are worshipable in Krishna consciousness. And Mahaprabhu, he shows that. And also, then Haridas Thakur, he also in this pastime, he shows that Mahaprabhu is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because who loved the holy names of Krishna more than Haridas Thakur? But what name did he chant? Gauranga, Gauranga. He chanted the holy name of Mahaprabhu. Why would he chant the name of Mahaprabhu? Why would somebody who knew the holy name of Krishna so well chant the name of Mahaprabhu unless Mahaprabhu is Krishna, right? And there we see again, this identity is coming forth. Okay, so on that note, Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava